A chilling wind howled through the desolate streets of Cedarwood, a small town nestled deep in the forest. The town, once lively and bustling, had fallen into a state of eerie silence. People whispered about strange occurrences, bizarre sightings, and inexplicable disappearances. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, one house stood at the center of the town's darkest rumors: the old Richardson Mansion. Samantha Greer was an average 25-year-old woman living in the bustling city of New York. Her life revolved around her job as an editor at a small publishing house, her tiny apartment, and her two cats, Whiskers and Tigger. She was content with her mundane routine until she received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. "Samantha Greer?" a stern voice inquired. "Yes, this is she," Samantha replied, curiosity piqued. "This is James Halloway, attorney at law. I regret to inform you that your great-uncle, whom you never met, Mr. Samuel Richardson, has passed away. You are the sole heir to his estate." Samantha was taken aback. She barely knew her family, let alone a great-uncle named Samuel. The attorney explained that her great-uncle had left her his mansion in Cedarwood. She had two options: sell the property or claim it. Intrigued and a little excited by the prospect of an adventure, Samantha decided to visit the mansion before making any decisions. A week later, she packed her bags, loaded her cats into her car, and set off on the long drive to Cedarwood. The drive through the forest was both beautiful and unsettling. Tall trees loomed overhead, their branches interlocking to create a tunnel-like effect. As Samantha approached Cedarwood, the GPS led her down a narrow, winding road that seemed to grow darker with every mile. She finally arrived at the Richardson Mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The mansion was a sprawling, Victorian-style building, its once grand facade now weathered and overgrown with ivy. The front gate creaked as she pushed it open, and the gravel path crunched under her feet. "Home sweet home," Samantha muttered to herself, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. Inside, the mansion was dark and dusty. Furniture was covered in white sheets, and cobwebs hung from the corners of the high ceilings. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and neglect. Samantha turned on her flashlight and began to explore, her cats following closely behind. She found the master bedroom on the second floor and decided to settle in there for the night. After setting up a makeshift bed and feeding her cats, she fell into an uneasy sleep, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures and distant whispers. Samantha awoke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the mansion. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened intently. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Gathering her courage, she grabbed a heavy candlestick and crept out of the bedroom. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" There was no response, only the oppressive silence of the mansion. Samantha's grip on the candlestick tightened as she made her way down the hallway. She paused outside a door at the end of the corridor, from which she thought she heard a faint whisper. Pushing the door open, she found herself in a small, dimly lit study. The room was filled with old books and papers, and a large, ornate mirror hung on the wall. Samantha approached the mirror, feeling an inexplicable pull towards it. As she stared into the glass, she saw her reflection and something else. A shadowy figure stood behind her, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Samantha screamed and spun around, but the room was empty. Her breath came in short gasps as she backed out of the study and fled to her bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She spent the rest of the night huddled under the covers, too terrified to sleep. The next morning, Samantha decided to explore the mansion in the daylight, hoping to dispel some of the fear that had gripped her the night before. She started with the study, determined to understand what she had seen. Among the piles of papers, she found an old leather-bound journal. The cover was worn and faded, but the name Samuel Richardson was still legible. She opened the journal and began to read. The entries detailed her great-uncle's descent into madness. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling an oppressive presence in the mansion. The final entries were the most disturbing. Samuel wrote about performing a ritual to communicate with the spirits, hoping to understand what they wanted. His last entry ended abruptly mid-sentence with a blotch of ink and a smear of blood. Samantha's hands trembled as she closed the journal. She now understood that the mansion was haunted, and whatever had driven her great-uncle to madness was still present. That night, Samantha was awakened again by the sound of footsteps. This time they were closer, as if someone was pacing just outside her door. She sat up, clutching the journal to her chest, and listened. The footsteps stopped, and a soft, mournful wail filled the air. Samantha's blood ran cold. She wanted to run, to leave the mansion and never look back. But something held her in place. She had to know what was happening. Gathering her courage, she opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The wailing grew louder, echoing through the mansion. She followed the sound to the basement door. The door was ajar and a faint light flickered from below. Taking a deep breath, Samantha descended the creaky stairs. The basement was cold and damp, filled with old furniture and crates. In the center of the room, she saw a circle of candles surrounding a small altar. On the altar was a strange, ancient-looking book. As she approached, the temperature dropped, and she could see her breath forming clouds in the air. She reached out to touch the book, and a hand grabbed her shoulder. Samantha screamed and turned to see the shadowy figure from the mirror standing behind her. Its eyes glowed with malevolent light, and it spoke in a voice that echoed in her mind. "Leave this place," it hissed, "or suffer the same fate as your uncle." Terrified, Samantha fled the basement and locked herself in the bedroom. She knew she couldn't stay in the mansion, but she couldn't leave without understanding the curse that plagued her family. The next day, Samantha decided to visit the local library to research the history of the Richardson mansion. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Crenshaw, was more than happy to help. "Ah, the Richardson mansion," Mrs. Crenshaw said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "There's quite a bit of history there. Tragic, really." She led Samantha to the archives, where they found old newspaper articles and records detailing the mansion's dark past. The Richardson family had been prominent in Cedarwood for generations, but their fortune was marred by tragedy. Mysterious deaths, disappearances, and rumors of occult practices plagued the family history. One article caught Samantha's eye. It was about a seance held by her great-uncle Samuel. According to the article, he had become obsessed with contacting the spirit of his deceased wife, who had died under mysterious circumstances. The seance had gone horribly wrong, resulting in the deaths of several participants and Samuel's descent into madness. Samantha realized that her great-uncle had opened a door to the spirit world, and the entities he had summoned were now haunting the mansion. Determined to end the curse, Samantha returned to the mansion and retrieved the ancient book from the basement. She spent hours poring over its cryptic text, trying to decipher the ritual her great-uncle had performed. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a banishment ritual. The instructions were detailed and complex, requiring various ingredients and precise incantations. Samantha gathered the necessary items and prepared to perform the ritual that night. As the sun set, she lit the candles in the basement and arranged them in a circle around the altar. She opened the book and began to chant the incantation, her voice trembling. The temperature in the room dropped, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around her. The candles flickered, and a low growl filled the air. Samantha continued to chant, her voice growing stronger with each word. Suddenly, the shadowy figure appeared before her, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged at her, but an invisible barrier stopped it from crossing the circle of candles. "Begone, spirit!" Samantha shouted, her voice echoing through the basement. "You are not welcome here!" The figure roared in anger, but Samantha held her ground, repeating the incantation. The shadows writhed and twisted, and the figure let out a final blood-curdling scream before dissipating into the air. The candles extinguished themselves and the basement fell silent. Samantha collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The curse had been lifted and the spirits were banished. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion changed. The oppressive feeling lifted and the air felt lighter. Samantha decided to stay and renovate the house, turning it into a place of warmth and light. She hired a local construction crew to help with the renovations, and the mansion slowly transformed. The ivy was cleared away, the walls were repaired, and the rooms were filled with new furniture. Samantha even adopted a dog, a cheerful Labrador named Max, to keep her company. The people of Cedarwood began to visit the mansion, curious about its transformation. Samantha hosted gatherings and events, turning the once haunted house into a hub of community activity. Despite the happy ending, Samantha never forgot the darkness that had once plagued the mansion. She kept her great-uncle's journal and the ancient book as reminders of the ordeal she had survived. Years passed, and the Richardson mansion became known as a place of healing and renewal. Samantha found happiness and peace in her new home, surrounded by friends and the warmth of the community. But every now and then, on a quiet night, she would hear a faint whisper or see a fleeting shadow out of the corner of her eye. She knew the spirits were still there, watching and waiting. But she also knew that as long as she remained vigilant, they would never again hold power over her or her home.